Good day, my name is Shamita and this is my video presentation titled Anaphora Resolution in Reading among Malaysian L2 English Speakers and Eye Tracking Investigation. Anaphora resolution is a fundamental reading skill which can be defined as the ability to associate between current and previous information. It involves the process of relating antecedent to its anaphors. The antecedents are usually noun phrases mentioned earlier in a sentence or discourse which provide the interpretation for a second expression, commonly pronouns, which are the anaphors. For example, in the first sentence, John saw Mary yesterday. She looked tired that day. Mary is the antecedent and she is the anaphor. In the second sentence, the minister is the antecedent and himself is the anaphor. Based on the MUET reading test in 2018 and 2019, reading skills among Malaysian third-year students are still not up to par. Strikingly, only 6.33% scored Band 5 in 2018 and 9.13% in the following year. For both years, Band 3 had the highest number of students. Thus, the present research was intended to explore the reasons underlying the poor English reading skills among Malaysian ESL speakers by focusing on the anaphora resolution skill. The purpose of this research was to investigate anaphora resolution in reading among L2 English speakers. This research focused on the processing of anaphors, which was measured using eye tracking data, and its relationship with comprehension of anaphors. Additionally, the role of word frequency during anaphora resolution was examined. This research has 3 research questions as below, focusing on Malaysian L2 English speakers' case behavior, relationship with comprehension ability, and influence of word frequency effect, which will all be further discussed in the analysis and discussion section. The quantitative research design employed corresponded with the main objective, which was to measure the statistical relationship between the variables. It is an experimental quantitative research through online and silent reading method. The quantitative analysis involves statistical analysis derived from the inbuilt software of the eye tracker. The stimuli were comprised of 2 sets of short text in English, adapted from journal articles. Each set consisted of 20 different items in 2 conditions for each item: pronoun high frequency and pronoun low frequency. Each experimental text was followed by a comprehension question, and 20 field text of the same non-experimental items were included for both sets. The participants were 40 Malaysian L2 English speakers who were undergraduates at UKM. Their ages ranged from 21 to 25, and their L1 were either Malay, Mandarin, or Tamil. They were in their first, second, or third year of their respective courses. Next, their MUET exam scores were inclusive for Band 3 to Band 5. On average, the participants rated their speaking, comprehension, reading, and writing skills ranging from intermediate to native-like. All participants had normal to corrected vision, with none having any diagnoses related to reading problems. The first research question is, how do L2 English speakers read sentences with anaphors? Descriptive analysis through SPSS was conducted. The first point is, generally the participants made reasonably longer fixations when the AOI is a low frequency antecedent for both first fixation duration and total fixation duration with greater number of fixations. The second point is, all 3 matrices show that participants fixed relatively longer and more frequently for anaphors of low frequency antecedents. The hypothesis proposed is accepted as participants demonstrated longer first fixation duration and total fixation duration with greater frequency come for anaphora sentences, particularly for low frequency antecedents and its anaphors. This behavior replicated some previous studies involving L1 and N2 English speakers. In those studies such as Yona and Osa 1995 and Reina and Duffy 1986, they explained that high-frequency antecedents are processed faster as the retrieval of these antecedents is more sensitive to lexical frequency. They asserted that texts involving anaphora resolution commonly produce longer reading times and frequent rereading, as these texts require higher level encoding and merging of words during sentence processing. The second research question is there a relationship between processing and comprehension of anaphors? Pearson correlation test was used, in which it was observed that there were no significant correlation between the processing of high and low frequency antecedents and anaphors with comprehension of the sentences. Secondly, low frequency antecedent and its anaphors are all negatively correlated with comprehension scores, whereas first fixation duration is the only metric which showed a negative correlation for high frequency antecedents. Next, the result demonstrated that only the differences in the number of fixations on anaphors was significant. The findings of the study conflicted with the claims made in past studies mentioning L2 speakers having difficulty with anaphora resolution, suggesting a significant relationship between processing and comprehension during anaphora resolution. Nonetheless, this study is aligned with previous studies, which stated that readers are able to comprehend a text adequately if not accurately if 98% of the words belong to the high and mid frequency groups. This may explain the findings of the study, as the level difficulty is 72.3 according to the Flash Reading Ease readability score equivalent to grade 7 in the United States, which equates to Form 1 students in Malaysia. Therefore, on average, the texts are fairly easy to read. Although the participants typically process high-frequency antecedents and its anaphors faster, however, their comprehension scores showed the opposite. These are aligned with previous findings with L1 English speakers, which deduced that for majority of the participants, their comprehension performances are neither predicted by the length of fixation nor frequency of fixations. Based on discourse salience, word frequency effects influence the saliency of words. In this context, low-frequency words will be more salient than high-frequency words. Hence, low-frequency words are easier to access as they are encoded more strongly in the memory due to greater processing load. One other conclusion that can be made is that Malaysian L2 English speakers who are advanced users of English do not appear to possess significant difficulties when reading anaphors. Out of 14 participants, 74% achieved a score of 80 and above, all of whom scored Band 4 and Band 5 in their MUET exam. On the other hand, the participant with Band 3 only scored 45%. Indicate that differences in language proficiency contribute to variation in comprehension performance, where students with good academic performance are not greatly affected by anaphora resolution as they are exposed to greater vocabulary. The third research question is, what is the influence of word frequency effect on the processing of anaphors? The analysis denoted that none of the 40 texts demonstrated significant influence on the differences in reading durations and frequency count, but p-values for antecedent can be deemed as approaching significance, and only the differences in the number of fixation on anaphors were significant. Data on effect size show that frequency count has a medium-sized effect of word frequency on the processing of anaphors. Meanwhile, R values for first fixation duration and total fixation duration revealed a rather medium effect size of word frequency on antecedents. Previous researchers explained that word frequency effect is less influential as proficiency increases, which corroborates findings on the differences in the number of fixation. For example, in one study, high-frequency words were fixated 89% of the time and low-frequency words 93% of the time. In another study, high-frequency and low-frequency words were fixated 11% and 23% respectively. This is because first fixation duration for high-frequency antecedents encompass lexical access and word interpretation, which mirror complex processing operations, while first fixation duration or low-frequency antecedents predominantly mirror lexical access with additional fixation indicating word interpretation. As more complex cognitive processes exhibit at a later stage for low-frequency words, the lemma re-access hypothesis by Simon and Smith in 1999 stated that during pronoun resolution, readers access the lemma level instead of the lexeme level. One possible justification for the result of this study based on previous study is that faster reading time was observed at the post-pronoun region for low-frequency antecedents and no effect at the anaphora regions. They argued that the word frequency effect is overt after pronouns due to re-access of the antecedent and that the participant usually read pronouns swiftly with frequent skipping. In conclusion, the gaze behavior of Malaysian L2 English speakers when reading anaphora text corresponded to past studies using L1 and L2 English speakers. On average, the means demonstrated that the participant made longer fixation duration and total fixation duration, with greater fixation when encountering anaphora sentences, especially low-frequency antecedents and anaphors. Secondly, there were no apparent correlation observed between the processing of anaphor sentences with comprehension performance of the participants, which may be due to the fact that experimental sentences used are of lower difficulty. Furthermore, based on the discourse salience, the participants may score better on comprehension questions with low-frequency antecedents and anaphors because they encoded more strongly in the memory due to greater processing load. Next, the word frequency effect on the whole is insignificant, which shows that low influence on the processing of anaphors. The possible justification is the processing of pronouns in sentences is typically delayed as they require access of a discourse representation. Hence, word frequency effect for pronouns occurs not at the pronouns itself but on the regions following the pronouns. Overall, advanced Malaysian L2 English speakers do not appear to show significant difficulties when reading anaphors as claimed by previous studies. Nevertheless, this study comprised of a relatively homogeneous group with regard to proficiency levels. Additionally, the study only comprised of 14 participants within the same population sample. Therefore, implementing diversity in a larger study with a wide range of proficiency levels and educational levels may offer more generalizable findings.